Hello everyone and welcome back to the Podcasters Podcast. My name's Louie and today we are talking about repurposing your content. How can you get the most out of one single episode? Okay, so a little bit about me. I am an editor at Disruptive Media, so repurposing media is my jam. So strap in, I'm going to tell you every last nugget that you can get out of a single podcast episode to maximize your reach and your audience. So first of all, what is repurposing? When we talk about content repurposing, we are talking about extracting every last bit out of an episode of content. So imagine you've recorded a 20-minute long episode of your podcast. Maybe it is just you sat on your own, or maybe it's an interview, or maybe it's something else. How do you then take that 20 minutes, that long form episode, and chop it up, reconstruct it, snip it out, all of that, so that you can have content throughout the entire week on all of these different platforms? So what we recommend at the agency is when someone sends in a full length 20-minute long episode of a podcast, we will then get 7 social media clips out of that. So when we say social media clips, we mean things for Instagram Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, that kind of thing. So these shorts will range between 30 seconds to a minute long, maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the platform and depending on what's being said. But these will be cut down snippets of the episode. Usually they'll contain a little bit of flashy editing, maybe some subtitles, things like that, and they will go out onto all of these platforms throughout the week. So say an episode releases on a Monday, we will then release social content throughout the week on each day. Now, the time that you do this obviously depends on your audience and your data and things like that. We aim for like the evening time, maybe around 6 p.m. if you want a specific time, but we will then release short form clips on Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok all at the same time throughout the week. So, you want to start a podcast, but you don't know how. First of all, like and subscribe and have a look around the channel. There's lots of useful videos to help you on your way to starting, scaling, and thriving in your podcast career. Also, did you know that we run a 3-day event over here in Peterborough called the Podcast Profit System? Come join us in a room of like-minded individuals, meet the progressive team, learn how we do things, and there's a free lunch thrown in as well. All right, let's get back to the video. Okay, so from this one piece of content, we've already got 7 short form clips. However, sometimes these clips are a little bit hard to find. So I want to give you a bit of advice on how to generate these clips and where to find them within your show. So say you're doing a piece to camera like this. Say you're just doing a 20-minute kind of infotainment kind of piece to camera, a little bit like this on your own. The clips can come way before you've started recording. So try and plan them into your recording. So as I write the script for this episode, or as I plan it, I will think about what my end content needs to be. So maybe within my script, I've written maybe 7 titles that I might want to talk a little bit about, or 7 jumping off points that I feel like I can talk around. These 7 points will end up being the foundation for my clips. So as I'm recording, as long as you think about the end product, you will give yourself a far easier time in the editing trying to find these things. Also, if you're using something like Riverside or an online platform, or you can even do this after the fact in some sort of AI tool, there are tools out there that will find clips for you. Remember, you'll need to watch them and confirm that they're okay. They can be a little bit ropey or find weird points. These AI tools aim to get as many clips out as humanly possible, and obviously you want the best ones. So try and watch them and really think about it, and try and be conservative when picking clips, because some of them can be rubbish and some of them are just AI dribble. But as long as you're watching them and you're checking, they're really good tools for like finding moments in your show. If you're doing some sort of interview episode, maybe you've got someone else and you're talking for maybe an hour or so, it might be a little bit harder to find clips than if you're planning them into your script and delivering them in a more catchy way. Obviously, if you're having an interview with someone, it's more conversational, it's more relaxed. So finding really snappy moments is a little bit more difficult. However, I've got some tips for you in that as well. So if you're interviewing someone, I recommend kind of looking at the latter end of the podcast episode for these clips. Obviously, when you're starting a show, they're warming up. It's a little bit more, you're giving them context. They're talking about their life a little bit, which isn't something I recommend, by the way. Don't ever ask them what their life story is. Try and find more interesting things to talk about. But the beginning of the conversation is a bit more conversational. It's a bit more relaxed. It's a bit more chill. Your guest hasn't properly warmed up yet. Later on in the podcast episode, in the interview, you might be asking them more quickfire questions, or you could bake quickfire questions in as a segment. That's usually really good for clips. Or what tends to happen is people start talking about more interesting topics later on. So as I'm editing an episode, I might jump to the end and start to go back from the end to find these nuggets of information. It's then sometimes good to include both the question and the answer. You might need to do a bit more editing because obviously the guest doesn't know that you're going to trim them down to 30 seconds. So you might need to put a little bit more editing grunt in there to kind of shorten it down and condense it and make it a bit more interesting. One really important thing to consider when you're doing your social clips, and you'll need to consider this when you're setting up for the main podcast episode itself, you need to make sure that when you're setting up the framing on your cameras, that you have enough headroom and enough chin room and that you are positioned nicely and central in the frame. If you don't do this, what can happen is for social clips, you'll need to punch in on the footage, because if you imagine a social clip, if you're looking at it on your phone, it's a different aspect ratio. So it's portrait rather than landscape. This means that we'll need to be able to stretch the footage slightly. So this is where camera resolution plays a little bit more of a factor. So, make sure that you're recording on a semi-decent camera so that you can punch in without losing too much quality, but also make sure that you've got good headroom and good chin room, and that also applies for your guest as well. So if you've got a guest on Riverside and they're, hunched over their computer in a cafe or something, just take a moment to get them to correct their framing so that you can use that properly for shorts. Before I talk about editing, there's a few more things that you might want to consider when recording, or a few more types of repurposed content that we can pull from episodes to really squeeze the most out of your content. So we've got our 7 social media clips, our 7 kind of shorts, if you will. Some other things that you can pull out. So you can pull out longer form content. So say you've got a 20-minute podcast episode or like an hour-long interview. You might have certain questions and answers or certain moments that are maybe 5 minutes long that you can cut out, repurpose, and put up again on YouTube or anywhere else as a longer form bit of content. So it gets its own thumbnail, it gets its own video, and it's more of a highlights thing, if you will. That will go out maybe a couple of days after the main episode and just acts as another chance for the algorithm to pick things up and throw things out. So if Rob's done an interview with someone that's particularly outrageous, there might be a really interesting question and answer within there that you can then cut out and put out as its own video that might get its own batch of views and attention and whatever. In addition to all of this, you might want to do some sort of trailer. So you might want to edit it up a little bit and put it out beforehand. Obviously, you need to be well ahead of schedule in order to make that happen, but that could build hype and that could go on social media and really give people, an idea of what the podcast is about before it goes live. And then if you wanted to create some sort of highlights reel after the fact, so maybe you could take some of your shorts that you've cut out and stitch them together into some sort of post highlight reel. That could be its own piece of content as well. And this shouldn't be limited to just video content. If you're an audio creator and you've created an audio episode without any cameras or video, do think about how you might repurpose that content as well. So you can use certain tools on the internet to create audiograms where you basically get an animated waveform and a bit of imagery. Think about, what graphic design elements that you could throw in there. You can still create 7 clips that you could put on, different platforms and things like that to gain attraction and all of that stuff. But obviously it won't be as engaging as video content, but it still could work. When it comes to editing, there's so many different things that you can do with shorts, and I encourage you to go and have a look at our channel and Rob Moore's channel and places like that. Look at your favorite YouTubers or podcasters to see how they do it and try and copy their style and emulate certain elements. Obviously, this is where an editor's job really comes into its own, and this is why in the agency we have a whole fleet of editors that, make it their job to make these clips as interesting as possible. So certain things that you need to be able to do is add subtitles to your clips. These subtitles obviously say what you're saying at the bottom, but they obviously can be animated in, or they can change color and they can swoosh in and move and do all this kind of thing. So that's one element to it, is adding subtitles. You then might want music underneath. So maybe you've got some branded music, or maybe you want to utilize the music on platforms like TikTok to maybe capitalize on some of the trends that are there. But try to remember that when using TikTok sounds, they might not blend too well with the content. So just consider that when you're uploading. Another thing that you need to consider is that these shorts need to really grab people's attention. So put a lot of focus and energy into the first 5 seconds of a clip to make sure that it is the most engaging thing possible. So you might want to add some punch-ins or some zoom-ins or some funky transitions or some B-roll perhaps, or maybe you can get some glitch effects or something like that to really kind of pique the interest. Something that we do for some of our clients is called pattern interrupt, where there's like a ding or a sound or a swoosh or some sort of iconography that happens at the very beginning of a clip, so that when someone swipes to it, it interrupts the flow, it kind of interrupts and gets people to tune in to what's happening on their screens. That might be a thing to consider, but that can get quite annoying after a while. So do have moderation with these pattern interrupts. Obviously, nothing beats interesting content. And what we find is sometimes, if an interview is a little bit boring or it's hard to find clips, or maybe if a setup's a little bit static like this one, people just swipe by. People make a decision on whether they're interested within the first half a second of watching a short. So maybe it's worth going outside of the studio, outside of the recording environment, pointing your camera at things and showing people stuff just to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit dynamic from the get-go. So consider what your content looks like and think, would I watch this myself? If not, it's probably not worth putting out there. One thing to note when you're putting out all these shorts into the world is that some will do well, some will not do well, some will go viral, some will get 1 view. You've just got to keep at it. So at the agency, we upload every single day for our clients. So you've got to do the same as well. And don't be disheartened if some clips flop, some clips succeed. The algorithm is a mythical beast and we don't quite know how it all works. So you have got to just keep feeding it stuff, maybe go back and change titles, or if something's not quite working, maybe just change the way you edit things, but constantly evolve, constantly change. And don't be disheartened. You will get a viral clip eventually. You've just got to think about how you do it and be slightly strategic about it. So that about does it for repurposing your content. If you've got any questions, do make sure to get in touch or drop us a comment down below. I've been Louie from the Disruptive Media Agency. Make sure to like, subscribe, review, rate, follow, all of that good stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.